They say 3 a.m. is the witching hour, but for me, it was the truth hour. Every single night, like a silent alarm wired directly into my nervous system, my eyes would snap open. No grogginess, just immediate cold clarity. I'd lie there in the dark for hours, staring at a ceiling I couldn't see, feeling a weight on my chest so heavy I was certain my ribs were about to crack. I went to the doctors. I took the EKGs. They found nothing, but I knew. My body knew what my pride wasn't ready to admit yet. I was dying from the inside out because of a secret. Before last Tuesday, I was the man with the plan. Arthur, the retired civil engineer. For 40 years, my life was about structures, load-bearing walls, and logic. I was the rock of the family, the one who was always stable, always debt-free, always in control. We had the golf club memberships, the Sunday dinners where I'd pour the wine and feel the warmth of a life figured out. I had made it. I was safe. But there's a specific kind of vulnerability that hits you at 63. It's not physical. It's an itch for a legacy. I didn't just want to be the retired guy. I wanted to be the great patriarch. I wanted my children to never know a day of struggle. I wanted one last massive victory to cement my name, and that's when the opportunity walked in. An old friend, a private equity tip, and a deal that promised to double my wealth in a matter of months. To a man of logic like me, it didn't look like a gamble. It looked like a calculated bridge to a better future. I sat in my home office, the sun shining through the window, and I signed a document, a ghost transaction, that I decided to keep to myself, just until the returns came in. I thought I was building a monument for my family. I had no idea that with that one stroke of a pen, I had just started digging my own grave. For 3 days, that contract sat on my desk like a loaded lung. As a civil engineer, I was trained to respect the factor of safety, that extra margin you build into a bridge so it doesn't collapse under unexpected stress. But as I stared at those documents, I was doing something I'd spent 40 years coaching young interns never to do. I was narrowing the margin to 0. I sat there with a yellow legal pad, trying to rationalize the irrational. On the left side, I wrote current reality, a comfortable retirement, a paid-off home, and the quiet dignity of a man who had done his job. On the right side, I wrote the vision, a multi-million-dollar inheritance for my kids, the great patriarch status, a victory so loud it would echo for generations. My ego was the architect of this disaster, and it was drawing up blueprints for a palace I couldn't afford. I remember the exact moment the hesitation died. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The house was silent. My wife was out gardening, humming a tune she'd known for 30 years, completely unaware that her husband was about to gamble our floorboards. I felt a slight ringing in my ears, what I now call the tinnitus of guilt, but I told myself it was just the blood pressure. Arthur, I whispered to the empty room, you've never missed a decimal point in your life. This isn't a gamble. It's a calculation. That was the lie that killed me. I didn't just sign a paper. I logged into our joint accounts, the accounts we had built brick by brick, year by year, and I initiated the wire transfer. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, a tiny blue line representing 40 years of sweat and missed vacations, disappearing into a private equity black hole. When the screen finally blinked, transaction complete, the silence in my office became deafening. I had just removed the load-bearing walls of my entire life. I had crossed a threshold where sorry would no longer have any currency. I was no longer the rock of the family. I was the ghost in the machine, waiting for the first crack to appear in the ceiling. For the first 30 days, I didn't feel like a man who had just gambled his life savings. I felt like a genius. In engineering, we have a term called aesthetic integrity. It's when a bridge looks magnificent, sweeping, and perfectly stable to the naked eye, even if the internal steel rebar is already oxidizing into dust. That was my life. On the surface, I was the great patriarch. I started picking up the check at every family dinner with a flourish, feeling the intoxicating warmth of my children's admiration. I bought my wife an expensive watch for no reason at all, just to see the sparkle in her eyes. A sparkle I told myself I had earned through my secret bravery. Every Friday, I'd receive a digital statement from my friend in private equity. The numbers were staggering. According to those spreadsheets, I wasn't just recovering the wire transfer, I was skyrocketing. I would sit in my home office, sipping a 20-year-old scotch, watching the sunset, and calculating exactly how many millions I would leave each child. I felt invincible. My ego was feeding on the adrenaline of the lie, telling me that I was the only one in the family with the stones to make the big moves. I looked at my wife gardening outside and felt a patronizing sense of protection. Poor Clara, I thought. She has no idea how much more secure her world is because of me. But the body is a whistleblower that doesn't care about your spreadsheets. Even during those golden weeks, the 3 a.m. wake-up calls never stopped. In fact, they got louder. I would snap awake with my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a code I couldn't yet decipher. The tinnitus of guilt transitioned from a faint hum to a persistent, high-pitched whine that only stopped when I was distracted by spending money. I started buying over-the-counter sleep aids, hiding the blue bottles behind the old paint cans in the garage. I was a man living in a palace of glass, convinced I had invented a way to make it bulletproof. I was so blinded by the vision of the legacy I was building that I ignored the most basic law of physics. You cannot support a massive structure once you've removed the foundation. Have you ever carried a secret so heavy it started to change who you see in the mirror? Tell me in the comments, does the weight ever actually go away, or do we just get used to the burden? I thought I was in total control. I thought I had beaten the system. I was waiting for the final payout to confess and be the hero. But while I was busy admiring the view from my imaginary throne, the first real crack appeared. Not in a spreadsheet and not in a bank account. It appeared in the one place a civil engineer should never ignore, the physical reality of a collapse that had already begun. The first crack in my glass palace didn't sound like a crash, it sounded like a notification, a system update from the private equity portal. For months, I had been watching those digital numbers climb like a steady, beautiful incline on a blueprint. But that Tuesday morning, the screen didn't show a dividend. It showed a temporary liquidity adjustment. In civil engineering, we call it a stress fracture. A tiny line in the concrete that tells you the entire slab is about to fail. My heart did a slow, sickening roll in my chest. I called Marcus, the old friend who had brought me into this. The man who had spent months calling me Arthur, the visionary, and the great patriarch, suddenly sounded like a stranger reading from a legal script. His voice was cold, clipped, and stripped of all that expensive warmth. It's just a standard audit, Arthur. A brief hold on withdrawals to ensure compliance. Don't be a grandfather about this. It's how the big boys play. Don't be a grandfather. The words felt like a slap. He knew exactly where to hit me, right in my ego. I went back to my legal pad, but the math was no longer my friend. I started calculating the burn rate. I had leveraged the house. I had drained the joint savings. To keep the mirage of our lifestyle going, the dinners, the gifts, the country club fees, I needed those dividends. Without them, I wasn't just losing my profit. I was losing the floor beneath my wife's feet. That was the moment the tinnitus of guilt turned into a deafening roar. I spent the afternoon in my office, the door locked, staring at a bank balance that was shrinking faster than a leak in a dam. I realized I wasn't an investor anymore. I was a gambler who had lost his first big hand and was already looking for a way to double down just to stay even. The legacy I was building felt less like a monument and more like a noose. I looked at the family photos on my desk, my kids smiling, my wife laughing at our anniversary, and for the first time, I didn't see a provider. I saw a predator who had stolen their future to feed his own vanity. I started to sweat, a cold, oily film that made my clothes feel like they were made of lead. I wasn't in control. I was a passenger in a car with no brakes, heading straight for a wall I had built with my own hands. Have you ever seen the exact moment a dream turns into a nightmare, but you're too proud to wake up? I'm curious, when the red flags start waving, do you run, or do you convince yourself they're just celebratory banners? Let me know in the comments, because I chose to keep walking into the fire. Instead of cutting the cable and letting the bridge fall, I did the unthinkable. I tried to weld the broken pieces together with more debt. In engineering, we call it reinforcing a failure, and it's the fastest way to kill someone. But my pride was a far more dangerous architect than my logic. I couldn't be the man who failed. I couldn't be the great patriarch who turned into a cautionary tale. So, I doubled down. I stopped answering the phone when my brother Dave called. He's a CPA, the kind of man who smells a bad balance sheet from a mile away. He'd left me 3 voicemails asking about that private equity firm he'd heard rumors about. I deleted them. I told myself he was just jealous of my vision. I stopped going to the Saturday morning coffee with the guys at the club. I couldn't risk one of them looking me in the eye and seeing the hollowed-out ghost I was becoming. I was building a fortress of isolation, brick by lying brick, convinced that if no one saw the cracks, the house was still standing. The excuses I fed myself were pathetic. I told Clara I was consulting for a firm in Dubai. That's why I was up at 3 a.m., I said. Time zones, darling. High-stakes structural reviews. A lie so thin it tasted like copper in my mouth. I started opening new credit cards in my name only, shuffling balances like a frantic magician, trying to keep the mirage of our life from evaporating. Every time a bill came, my heart would stutter, a sharp, localized pain blooming behind my sternum. I was no longer a man. I was a ticking clock. I had no one to turn to because I had pushed everyone away to protect the secret. I sat in my office in total silence, surrounded by blueprints of a life that no longer existed, realizing the most terrifying truth of all. I had spent 63 years learning how to build things that last, only to spend my final act ensuring that my own collapse would be absolute, lonely, and silent. Have you ever lied so much that you actually forgot what the truth sounded like? Have you ever felt the walls closing in, knowing you're the one who built them? Tell me, how far would you go to save your pride before you realized you were just burying yourself alive? The EKG was a flat, green line of mockery. I was lying on a cold hospital gurney, the paper sheet crinkling beneath me like the dry husks of my own ambitions. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press, a white-hot spike of pain radiating down my left arm. I was certain, I was grateful, that my heart was finally giving up. It was the only honorable exit left. I wanted the machine to flatline. I wanted the silence of the grave to drown out the screaming sirens of my bank balance. But the doctor, a woman half my age with eyes that had seen too much truth, just sighed and set the clipboard down. "Your heart is perfect, Arthur," she said, her voice sounding like a gavel. "The enzymes are normal. The rhythm is steady. You aren't having a heart attack." I looked at her, gasping for air that felt like broken glass. "Then why can't I breathe?" I choked out. She leaned in, her gaze stripping away my great patriarch mask until there was nothing left but the shivering, 63-year-old fraud underneath. "Because your nervous system is in total flight or fight mode," she whispered. "Arthur, you aren't sick. You're terrified. What are you running from?" I couldn't answer her, because at that exact moment my phone, vibrating in the plastic bag of my personal belongings, lit up with the final notification. A formal notice from the bank. The temporary liquidity adjustment wasn't temporary. Marcus, my old friend, was gone. His office was a shell, his phone was a dead signal. My house, my wife's garden, the inheritance for my children, it wasn't just at risk, it was liquidated. I had spent 40 years building bridges only to realize I was standing on one I had rigged with explosives. I stood in front of the emergency room mirror after she left, staring at a ghost. I didn't see a provider. I didn't see a retired engineer. I saw a predator who had eaten his own family's future to satisfy the hunger of his own ego. I had traded Clara's peace of mind for a digital mirage. I had stolen my children's safety to feel like a big player for one last season. The tinnitus of guilt was gone, replaced by a deafening, hollow silence. I realized then that at 60, your body is a whistleblower that doesn't care about your pride. You can lie to the world. You can lie to the woman sleeping next to you, but you cannot lie to your own blood and bone. I was the architect of this ruin. I was the one who pulled the load-bearing walls down. And as I walked out of that hospital into the cold morning air, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I wasn't going home to a palace. I was going home to a carcass. If you're waking up at 3 a.m. with that same weight on your chest, please, listen to me. Don't look at the pharmacy. Don't look for a medical excuse. Look at the mirror. Correct the lie before your heart does it for you. Because the truth is expensive, but it's the only thing that will ever let you sleep again. I walked out of those sliding hospital doors into a world that looked exactly the same, but felt like a foreign country. I didn't go to the pharmacy for the stress meds the doctor offered. Instead, I drove straight to the glass and steel tower where Marcus's office used to be. I knew what I'd find, a for lease sign and a pile of unopened mail, but I needed to see the physical evidence of my own stupidity. I stood there, a 63-year-old man in a rumpled suit, staring at a locked door, and I finally let the great patriarch die. There was no secret recovery coming. No magic wire transfer, just the cold, hard vacuum of a ruin I had designed with my own pride. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 2 hours, the engine off, watching the sun climb over the horizon like a judge taking the bench. I looked at my hands, the hands that once calculated the load-bearing capacity of skyscrapers, and I realized they were shaking, not from a heart attack, but from the sheer crushing weight of reality. I had 2 choices. I could keep driving, disappear, and let the bank explain the disaster to Clara, or I could go home and be the man who destroyed her world. I realized then that as long as I kept the secret, I was already a ghost. The money was gone, but my soul was still sitting in that driver's seat, waiting for a command. Have you ever had to choose between your life and your pride? I finally understood that my 3 a.m. reckonings weren't a curse. They were a rescue mission. My body was trying to wake me up before the lie became my coffin. I'm driving home now. I can see our roof in the distance, the roof I gambled away while she was sleeping. I don't know if she'll let me through the front door. I don't know if my children will ever speak my name again. But as I turn into the driveway, the tinnitus of guilt has finally stopped. The walls are falling down, the mask is off, and for the first time in 6 months, I am finally going to breathe. Even if the air tastes like ash. I'm going to tell her the truth, because a life in ruins is still better than a life that doesn't exist. I don't live in that house with the sweeping driveway anymore. I don't pour the expensive wine at Sunday dinners, and I don't have a multi-million-dollar legacy to leave my children, except for this story. Today, my entire life fits into a small 2-bedroom rental, and the great patriarch I tried so hard to build is buried under a mountain of liquidated assets and broken promises. I traded 40 years of honor for 6 months of feeling like a big player. And let me tell you, the exchange rate was a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The 3 a.m. wake-up calls haven't stopped, but the weight on my chest has changed. It's no longer the sharp, cold spike of a secret waiting to explode. It's the dull, heavy ache of living with the consequences. I have to look at Clara every morning and know that her peace, her garden, and her security were the chips I pushed into the center of the table without her permission. As an engineer, I spent my life obsessed with structures that last, yet I was the one who pulled the pins out of my own family's foundation. I thought I was building a monument. I was actually digging a grave. If you are watching this right now and your eyes snap open at 3 a.m., if you are staring at the ceiling because you've gambled something you can't afford to lose, listen to me. You think you're being a hero. You tell yourself you're protecting them by carrying the burden alone. You're lying. You're not a protector. You're a predator, and you're eating your family's future to feed your own ego. You're waiting for a miracle withdrawal that isn't coming, while your body is screaming at you to stop the collapse before it's total. Don't wait for the EKG. Don't wait for the for lease sign to go up on your life. Correct the lie today. Walk into the other room, wake up the person you love, and tell them the truth while there is still something left to save. The truth is expensive. It will cost you your pride, your status, and maybe even your comfort, but it's the only thing that will ever let you breathe again. I lost the house, but I finally found my soul. Don't make my mistake. Don't let your heart stop just to get a moment of peace. Wake up before the silence becomes permanent.